Welcome to the first episode of Capital Recap, a sports show where I walk you through the games and scores around the DMV, as well as a couple games of interest, including a couple of prime performances out in Colorado. It was not a strong start for the Washington Commanders, as Joey Slye missed the field goal on their opening drive. Maybe a bad snap by Cameron Cheeseman, but still not a great start for the Commanders as they found themselves down 21-3. Sam Howell didn't look very comfortable in the pocket in his first 17 dropbacks, sacked 3 times, a total of 4 times overall throughout the game. The offensive line might be a problem of concern throughout the remainder of the season. Speaking of concerns for the rest of the NFL, Marvin Mims Jr., rookie wide receiver, might become a problem. On his first 2 catches of the game, 113 yards and a touchdown, and that's not even including his 45-yard punt return and a couple yards rushing, 8 yards rushing in the first half, 10 yards overall. But that would be the end of his domination. It all took place in the first half. From there, the Commanders actually started turning this one around. Following the 21-3 start, Jamin Davis forces a fumble right here from Russell Wilson, and things took off for the Commanders. From there, Sam Howell finds Logan Thomas, who'd unfortunately leave the game with a concussion after taking a pretty big and questionable hit. But the Commanders go for 2 right after that and make it an 11-point game. Credit Ron Rivera and Washington's coaching staff for the way they handled their timeouts right after this, as they call 2 timeouts on Denver's ensuing drive and get themselves the ball back with enough time to go down and kick a field goal, entering halftime 21-14. Denver got the ball back after halftime, but Washington forced them to punt, and right after that, more scores. Washington ties up the game. Sam Howell, 30-yard strike to Terry McLaurin in the end zone, and Washington was off and running from that, quite literally. After Emmanuel Forbes intercepts the ball for his first career interception in the NFL, Brian Robinson Jr. takes over. 2 rushing touchdowns from that point, including 129 total yards for the game. That, of course, takes us to Denver's final drive, where things got a little dicey. Starting on their own 13-yard line, backed up another 5 yards by a false start penalty. Leave it to Russell Wilson. He was cooking in the first half. Washington somehow subdued him in the second half until this final drive, finding Courtland Sutton at the 50-yard line, which I thought might have been incomplete. Didn't look like he got that toe tap down, but referees are referees for a reason. They get paid to do what they do. I'm just here telling you about the game. That Sutton catch set up a Hail Mary from the 50-yard line, where Russell Wilson somehow connected with Brandon Johnson after a bunch of tips, and Brandon Johnson came down with it. Of course, Denver, trailing by 2 at that point, goes for the 2-point conversion to try to tie the game up, and you be the judge here. In my belief, Benjamin St-Juste did get a hand on him, but it didn't look like enough contact for the reaction that Courtland Sutton had. The Commanders hold on, start the season 2-0 for the first time since 2011, and they defeat the Denver Broncos in Denver for the first time since 2001, a span that stretches their last 3 meetings. Despite taking a little bit of damage from the Denver defense, Sam Howell looked pretty good out there, completing 69% of his passes and throwing for 1 yard shy of 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, and of course he gets his first win on the road as he improves to 3-0 in his Commanders' career. Next, Washington will host the Buffalo Bills. That's a real in-depth look at the Commanders' win, but let's go quick fire for the rest of the games. The Ravens win 27-24. Lamar Jackson shined, 291 total yards, 2 touchdowns. Odell Beckham Jr. out with an ankle injury. However, it doesn't seem like it's going to be too serious. He left in the second quarter, did not return. Joe Burrow, however, looked like he returned to his old self. 2 touchdowns, an interception, but it does look like he tweaked his calf. News came out about that after the game. One of those interceptions going to Geno Stone. Right here, you can see possibly didn't see all the room he had to his right. Instead, walked out of bounds. Could have had a pick 6 right here. That snaps a 2-game overall losing streak for the Baltimore Ravens to the Cincinnati Bengals and a streak of 3 consecutive on the road. Next, the Baltimore Ravens will host the Indianapolis Colts. Enjoying a quiet Camden Yards complex, the Orioles clinched the playoffs with their 5-4 extra innings win over the Tampa Bay Rays. Technically, they clinched the playoffs before their win with the Texas Rangers dropping a game, but tomato, tomato. The Orioles split the series 2 games apiece with the Tampa Bay Rays, and of course win the season series with the Rays, giving them the division tiebreaker. The O's clinch a playoff spot for the first time since 2016 and potentially looking at his odds to make a playoff run. Felix Bautista threw a full bullpen. We'll see what that means, if anything, down the line as the season comes to a close. Next up for the Orioles, they'll start a road trip against the Houston Astros. The O's Beltway rival, the Washington Nationals, avoided a sweep at the hands of the Milwaukee Brewers, winning 2-1, also in extra innings, also in the 11th inning. Michael Chavis orchestrates a double play that keeps the Nationals alive. They snap a 5-game losing streak, and next they'll host the Chicago White Sox. As for Maryland football, another 0-14 start, another come-from-behind win. 42-14 over their old ACC rivals, the Virginia Cavaliers. Maryland finally snaps their blackout game curse after losing their previous 2 blackout games by an embarrassing total. They'll start their Big Ten slate as they travel to face Michigan State. As for Navy, they fall to 1-2 after losing 28-24 to Memphis on Thursday. They are off next week. Continuing with college football, 2 top 25 teams lost this week, including Kansas State on a last-second field goal to Missouri, and Tennessee losing to Florida at the Swamp. In more local ties, in the Battle of the Real HU, Hampton defeats Howard for the 7th consecutive time, grabbing this one 35-34. Of course, the Commanders got a win in Colorado, but how about Colorado versus Colorado State? Shedeur Sanders is him. He looked poised, leading that 98-yard tying drive at the end of regulation, and eventually Colorado would knock off Colorado State in double overtime, 43-25. Shedeur only throwing 9 incompletions, 348 yards, 4 touchdowns, and doing most of it without his number 1 target, Travis Hunter, who took a dirty shot late. Prayers up to him. Not wanting to speculate too much, but got to be worried about his ribs and got to be worried about his lungs right there. Speaking of the Sanders boys, Shiloh with an 80-yard pick 6. He told the crowd that he thought about high-stepping. If you look back at it, he was kind of tracked down at the goal line, so I don't think he even had time to high-step. But, of course, Coach Prime, very proud of his boys, saying in the post-game interview that, he's happy for him, but it's about everybody on that team as Colorado starts 3-0, and they'll face their first real big test as next week they will travel to face number 10 Oregon in their first ranked battle of the season. Speaking of big stakes, the Washington Mystics face a win or go home on Tuesday after losing their playoff opener against the New York Liberty 90-75. From one team fighting for their playoff lives to another team fighting just to make the playoffs, DC United holds on to the 9th seed in the MLS table after a 0-0 draw with Charlotte FC. Their next test will come on Wednesday as they host Atlanta United. Audi Field's other occupant, the Washington Spirit, also held on to their playoff positioning, the 6th seed in NWSL, after falling to Gotham FC 2-0. They'll have one more shot to hold on to that playoff spot as they host Kansas City, the second to worst team in the league. All they need is those 3 points, and it should be an easy one. Again, as I said, the second to worst team in NWSL. We'll wind things up on the track where Denny Hamlin won at Bristol in the third race of the playoffs. Followed by a couple of Joe Gibbs Racing teammates, Christopher Bell finished the race in third place. He won the first and second stages. And Ty Gibbs, who's not in the playoffs, finished fifth. As for the fourth and final Joe Gibbs Racing car, Martin Truex Jr. didn't have a great finish, but he did have a great night. Going from the playoff bubble last week after a crash did not allow him to finish the race. After this race, he winds up in second place in playoff standings. Speaking of the playoff standings, William Byron holds on to the number 1 spot, leading by just 1 point over Martin Truex Jr. And of course, this was the final race before the round of 12, so 4 racers were eliminated, including former Joe Gibbs Racing standout Joey Logano. Next up in the NASCAR circuit will be Texas Motor Speedway. Thank you everybody for tuning in. This has been the first episode of Capital Recap. I hope you join me next time. God bless.